By September 10, 2025, all Ukrainians living in Russian-occupied territories, as well as those within Russia itself, must, according to a new decree from the Kremlin dictator, apply for Russian citizenship. Additionally, the Ministry of Health is required to conduct medical examinations of these individuals within the same time frame. Essentially, this means collecting personal data from the local population. Those who refuse will be deported. The document was published on the official legal information portal.
Ukrainian citizens currently in the Russian Federation who do not have legal grounds to reside in the Russian Federation must either leave the Russian Federation on their own or resolve their legal status in the Russian Federation by September 10, 2025, from the Moscow Times publication.
Thus, the Kremlin is trying to address the demographic crisis in the country, according to experts. Russia's enormous losses in the war against Ukraine and the record wave of immigration have negatively impacted an already bleak population statistic. The country is experiencing a sharp decline in the birth rate, while the Kremlin attempts to convince Russian women not to pursue careers or education, but rather to have children as young as often as possible. The deep economic crisis makes any positive outcome unlikely. In the beginning of the 80s, Russia had a population of 148 million. According to preliminary data from Rosstat, the population of Russia at the beginning of 2025 has decreased to 146 million. In reality, the population decline may be even greater.
Look at what is happening with Russia's demographics, at the situation with the generation capable of decisive actions. This generation is small due to the demographic crisis, and it is suffering most from the war.
This is part of the Kremlin's ongoing policy of eradicating the national and cultural identity of Ukrainians, according to analysts at the Institute for the Study of War. Moscow is conducting a campaign of forced passportization in territories occupied by Russian forces in Ukraine to legitimize Russia's territorial claims and strengthen its control over the local population. Moreover, this is aimed at altering the demographic composition of the occupied territories.
The Kremlin has also conducted Russian repopulation campaigns to artificially decrease the number of Ukrainians living in occupied Ukraine and inflate the number of Russians in these areas. From the Institute for the Study of War report.
In February 2025, Alexander Gorovoi, Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation, announced that Russia had complete passportization in the territories occupied by Russian forces in Ukraine. According to the Russian official migration division, employees successfully completed the issuance of Russian passports to Ukrainians in 2024. The Kremlin's methods of forcing are well known. Russian occupiers use repression against those who refuse to accept Russian citizenship. Medical personnel are forbidden from providing assistance to individuals without Russian passports. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine stated that by forcing Ukrainian citizens in Russian-occupied territories to obtain the passports of the aggressor state, Moscow is violating several international legal instruments.
First, this violates the Geneva Convention on the Protection of Civilian Persons in Time of War, specifically Article 49, which prohibits the forced relocation or deportation of civilians from occupied territories. Article 47, which defines the forcible transfer of civilian populations as a serious war crime. We consider this to be a null and void act. It is another step in Russia's campaign of discrimination, persecution, and the forced displacement of Ukrainian citizens from their homeland, or coercing them into becoming foreigners.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs declared that the systematic deportation and persecution of Ukrainians is part of Russia's deliberate policy of genocide against the Ukrainian people, reported by Alexander Zaslavets, Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.
The Russian army has intensified its offensive in the Pokrovsk direction, accounting for a third of all battlefield engagements. After a brief pause for regrouping, occupying forces are now ramping up their attacks, according to Viktor Trehubov, a spokesman for the operational and strategic grouping of troops, Khortytsia. Russian troops are deploying all available weapons to advance, though there are no signs yet of a repeat of the peak assault levels seen in February 2025.
From the beginning, I have said that in the case of Pokrovsk, the Russians will not give up it easily. They may temporarily shift their forces to other directions, but they need the city, so this all makes sense. Every settlement holds strategic importance for them. There are no significantly large settlements near Pokrovsk, only small villages. Viktor Tragubov, spokesman for the operational and strategic grouping of troops Khortytsia, in an interview with Free Radio.
At the beginning of March, Russian forces reduced their attacks on Pokrovsk and instead intensified their operations near Toretsk. Now they have resumed their offensive attempts in the Pokrovsk area. According to the representative of Khortytsia, Russian troops are trying to advance along the southwest edge of the city, but so far without notable success. More than 2,500 civilians remain in the city, according to the Pokrovsk military administration, which continues evacuation efforts.
For the Pokrovsk community, this spring is loud and destructive. The city and surrounding villages are under daily Russian shelling. They are being hit with guided bombs, artillery and FPV drones, which now reach as far as Robinske. Evacuation efforts have intensified. Serhiy Dobryak, head of the Pokrovsk city military administration, on Telegram.
The Russian army has also stepped up its activities in the Kupiansk-Liman direction. All of this indicates that Moscow has no intention of ending its war against Ukraine, experts believe. Mobilization in Russia has also not slowed. According to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, in 2024, at least 427,000 soldiers were conscripted into the aggressor state's army. In 2025, the Kremlin plans to mobilize another 280,000 people. Russian forces are suffering massive losses in both personnel and equipment. At the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025, Russia was losing over 40,000 soldiers per month. New recruits are expected to fill these gaps, but analysts point out that the Russian military lacks the necessary resources to fulfill Putin's plans.
There have been no significant advances compared to November and December of last year. The data clearly shows that the Russian army is slowing down considerably.
Putin wants war, and everything else is just a smokescreen, said Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs Andriy Sybiha. He emphasized that Kyiv has given clear consent to a 30-day ceasefire, but Moscow has no real intention of halting its military aggression.
We have already begun forming a national team to develop mechanisms for effectively monitoring a possible ceasefire, an extremely complex process. As of today, the front line where daily battles occur stretches over 1,300 kilometers.
Experts believe that Russian forces will continue trying to seize as much Ukrainian territory as possible.
They will likely play this card for as long as they can. For now, they are stalling, hoping to gain more territorial advantages and strengthen their position on the ground.
According to journalists from Sky News, Putin shows no sign of compromise, and Kremlin's stance has not changed. The Russian dictator will never outright reject a US proposal for a ceasefire, but he will not support it either, the publication notes. This means that Russia will continue claiming to seek peace, while in reality prolonging the war. Reported by Katerina Bastun, Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.